morning, everybody. Who's ready for the great debate? Let's get ready to rumble. All right, our teams have plotted their strategy. They have their facts in their back pockets, lies, stories, anecdotes. We'll see what comes out, and they're ready to make their case. Please help me welcome to the stage our two debate teams. First, for the Great Debate Alliance team, come on up, please. We have Kate Borg, Design Director for the OnTrack Alliance, also with WSP Canada. Wesley Muir, Manager of Business Development for Veolia North America. And Joshua Ogier, Senior Vice President and North American Advisory Practice Lead for Mott MacDonald. Welcome. And for our P3 debate team, we have Jensen Clarke, Director, Head of P3 Business Development for Fengate Asset Management. Joey Comeau, Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President of Capital for EllisDon. And Marie Foley, Director of INTECH Risk Management. Welcome. Okay, this is going to be fun. And I think this topic sort of reflects what goes on in the hallways and the corridors for the last couple of conferences. This is the topic of the day, and we're looking forward to getting a good debate underway. This debate's going to run using a modified Oxford Union debate style. So in this, one member of each team will argue for and against a specific idea, and then we will take turns presenting and opposing the points of view, followed by what I think will be the most entertaining part of this, the open skirmish, the informal and provocative debate between the broader teams. So the format's going to be divided into 5 sessions. The main topic, and this is the proposition that people will argue for and against, the overall question, or really the overall proposition. Overall, P3s deliver better outcomes than alliances for major infrastructure projects. So agree or disagree with that proposition. We're going to open and close with that, and in the middle we're going to have 3 sandwiched arguments on 3 topics that are sort of central to this whole thing. First, risk allocation, which one's better? Second, value for money, including the period beyond the construction completion date, which is better. And third, project success, sort of the nebulous concept of what success looks like, which is better. So we'll be doing that. Our audience and all of you will vote. So using your conference app, you'll vote and select your champion and the winner of today's great debate. So we'll be voting just on that first and last question. Okay, and the arguments in the middle will buttress the arguments made throughout, and then we'll close and see who's going to win. Sorry, Dyke. Okay.
That's okay. We're just trying to work out the order, make sure we're in the right.
Okay. So if you don't have it, please download your conference app. Each of you is entitled to cast 1 vote, but you can change your mind. And if the debaters are doing a good job, they'll influence the votes along the way. And you can see in real time how your colleagues here in the room are voting. So do you want to go with the flow? Do you have your own point of view? Are you influenced by something that you've heard that's been provocative and impactful? The choice is yours. So teams, be warned, someone can vote right now, but they can change their mind in the app. You just need to keep all of you on your toes for the next 50 minutes. So all right, let's get down to brass tacks and get to the arguments. One thing I should say before we start though, our debate teams, when we were preparing or sort of getting sorted out for this, all said, listen, we like the argument that we have today, but most of our organizations participate in both lines of business, and our clients participate in both lines of business. So today, it's winner take all. There is no maybe button on your voting, so you can't say, well, the better view is a combination of the two, okay? So this is, you're gonna hear people come out swinging for one side of the argument and the other side of the argument, even though they might, when leaving the room, say, yeah, if the opportunity is available, I'd do the other kind of transaction as well. So here we go. Let's start with the overall question, or the overall proposition. P3s deliver better outcomes than alliances for major infrastructure projects. Agree or disagree? Okay, so we're going to start with Team Alliance. You're going to disagree, I'm sure. But over to you. We'll start with frame what is an alliance and why is it clearly the better option?
Thanks, Mark. So I feel like I've got a bit of a tough crowd here today. Of course, I'm at a P3 conference trying to convince you all that alliancing gives better outcomes. So let's see how I go. But I'm feeling more confident after our previous panel. So what is an alliance? It's where the benefits of acting together are greater than we act individually. Acting together means that the owner or one or more of the service providers work together as an integrated team for a specific project outcome. The commercial framework is aligned to that project outcome. Interestingly and importantly, the McKinsey Global Institute report from 2017 and 2018 predicted the future of collaborative contracts. This was the way forward to achieve better project outcomes. It mentions in the report that the key for project delivery was that each party brings unique perspectives, strengths and capabilities to table at that project delivery status. These attributes are then leveraged, and the party best positioned is the one that will have the highest impact. So what are these attributes? Let's call them HITs, high impact truths. Because with alliancing, the hits keep on coming. So let's talk about those hits. Win-win or lose-lose. There's no one party that overshadows another when it comes to commercial project gains or pains. This is what motivates a team to work together better and stronger. I've got more of an interest if I'm at the conversation at the start and the conversation at the end, because it's all about me and I'm creating the hits. It's being allowed at each stage of the project cycle life to be allowed to participate in the collaborative discussions that will have meaningful impacts on cost and delivery timelines, as well as safety and quality. Hit 2, identify risk early and together. The best party is placed to manage that risk as a project team. We heard this morning about transparency of risk. That's what alliancing does. We need to understand that what's our agenda here, and our agenda is to build great infrastructure rather than crossing my fingers and I hope that it will go okay. Getting the risk equation right, we heard that this morning too. How can I get the risk equation right if I don't have everybody in the room? Hit 3. In an alliance, I'm allowed to concentrate on innovative design solutions and innovative construction solutions. Rather than having to go to conversations on commercial jockeying for positioning every day, I can focus on collaboration and problem solving. Quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, as if my learned colleagues would even know, none of these guys have worked on an alliance before. I work on an alliance right now, today even. So how do they know that alliancing is better than P3 and has more successful outcomes? I have no certainty on whether I'm going to enjoy when I'm on a P3, because I've worked on P3s as well, I have no certainty on whether I'm going to enjoy my day. I could be in a contractual stoush with the contractor every day. On an alliance, I know that I'm going to have an engineering conversation, not a risk jockeying for position or commercial conversation that makes me feel like I don't want to deliver good public infrastructure. Thank you.
All right, shots fired, very good. And you've moved the needle already. Okay, what do you say, Team P3? Where's the rebuttal?
Thank you, Kate. I hear some noise from all my DBFM proponents in the room.
I think we did a first question. Oh, no, you're
So yes, we are for P3, and for P3 I mean DBFM projects. My opening arguments I'll stage in 4 subcategories through the lens of IO's definition of alliance. First argument, alliance is terrible for the taxpayer. P3 is great for the taxpayer. If you look at the definition of alliance, costs and schedule risks are shared. Owners are exposed to uncapped risk. Projects are not competitively bid. Market participants simply can't put a price to something that is not fully defined. As a Canadian taxpayer, this is terrifying to me. DBFM is a model that this country needs. We need accountability. We need our liquidated damages, our lender's log stop dates. When we're coming up with a project schedule and the right cost for a project, we need our LTA Rolodex of market comparables. The Alliance doesn't have this. Number 2, we don't have the right resources to procure Alliance in this country, unfortunately. We do not have the right mindset. If you look at the definition of Alliance, it's a non-adversarial approach, good faith commitments, A positive culture, no fault, no blame, best for project. That sounds great. But for the last 20 years, we've been negotiating best for taxpayer in a relatively adversarial approach. That is our mindset. Number two, we do not have the bench strength to pull off the alliance in any sort of scale. We have great procurement professionals, but they are not great construction executives. We simply do not have the depth of strength on our bench. DBFM, you can pull off with a relative skeleton crew. Look around the US. Every day we're seeing first-time clients look at DBFM projects. Fengate closed Clackamas County Courthouse, brand new owner. We had one champion, a financeable template, and a good suite of advisors. The project was a success. We had a great competition. Third, accountability and risk. I read the definition a few more times. I could not find the word accountability. Kate will say, hey, there's a pain share, gain share for construction costs. And I'll say, awesome. If you reference the 2022 KPMG report on Alliance, you'll notice that 90% of the construction budget is cost, 10% roughly is overhead and profit. That 10% is what goes into the gain share, pain share. That means that 90%, those overages are all in the government. Fourth, as it stands in this country, there is no long-term focus of Alliance. When you look at the definition of life cycle considerations, no optimization of life cycle cost and long-term quality performance by integrating construction and maintenance. No guarantee of asset performance. Something very scary to me. I think it is clear to see that the DBFM is not perfect, but it is definitely the right starting point and the right model for this country.
All right. You're done?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. You were on a roll there. I thought there was something more to come. But I'm looking at the monitor, and Team P3 has fully recovered and gone into the lead. So
awesome.
Kate, you made some good points, but the counterpoints are coming. Okay, so we're going to go on to the three micro-arguments, the three embedded arguments in what's better, topic-specific. And each of these is set up as a 10-minute debate with 3 minutes for each side to make introductory remarks and then 4 minutes for open field tackles. We'll just see what happens. Should be fun. So let's start with the P3 team this time, and the topic is value for money, including the period beyond construction completion. Who's going to start for the P3 team? Marie.
I'll do that. Okay, DBFM considers the whole life cost of a project, but it also holds the participants accountable. So good design, good construction can result in lower costs for the operations period, the maintenance period, but also higher qualities for those periods. I'm not going to be talking long about this because there is no value for money comparable on an alliance model, and there's absolutely no accountability for the costs and the maintenance and the quality during the operations period. I think it's that simple.
Is that it?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one.
Elegance and simplicity, yeah?
That's it.
Okay.
That's what I'm known for.
Yes.
Tough one.
Thank
What do you
you.
have to say?
Yeah, I think that adopting the whole life cost for a project is really, is not exclusive to P3s. Municipal projects, especially those environmental infrastructure projects that have a considerable O&M component, are extremely becoming larger and more complex, and they're very challenging to manage if you're not including the O&M operator in the beginning of the discussions. And I think that what we're seeing in the Alliance model provides for the engagement of the O&M with the design build and the owner to basically talk about four, what we say, high impact truths. One is to focus on life cycle costs to achieve the lowest feasible long-term cost for processing flows. And I mean, I speak from a company that's purely O&M. It's an ability to develop an integrated project design team, working together on transferring design and other issues consistently through the process, the design process, the construction process. We see this model used effectively throughout North America and the world. And finally, the application of best practices is particularly when we talk about long-term management of assets in the repair and replacement of contracts. That's the problem, is you're talking about contracts that are anywhere from 5 to 20, 30 years. And that's a challenge in the kind of P3 model. I would say the other issue that I want to talk about is the off-ramping. A lot of times people talk about these projects and simply say that's fait accompli, that's done. Well, what's happening with the alliance model is that you have a component of off-ramping where all three parties can go off. Now, obviously, everyone turns to the issue of saying, okay, if you're off-ramping, there's no ability, that's just an incentive to get out. Frankly, we find the opposite. It's an incentive to be part of it. What we found a few weeks ago with a particular project, it wasn't ours, but others, they actually stopped the process simply because they realized they had the wrong process without even going technology process. And they hadn't gone so far as to go through an elaborate design to build and such. They found out that was a far better opportunity, and they're taking a pause button. So the project will still go ahead, but it will be different. Last least, I would say the thing that we're missing in this room right now, and it's not a criticism of the council, is we don't have the owners here. And the owners are absolutely critical because there are three types of owners. There's those are the project proponents, that the specific water department, waste department, energy department, that of the procurement department, and then council. And I think that we talked about this before, is that we need to have all three parties in the owners camp along with the design and construction camp in together and talking about these projects. And that's just not happening. That goes against the grain. So we really do need to have alliance model, I think, serves those purposes extremely well.
I'd like to respond to that.
I had a feeling that was coming.
The service providers are absolutely included during the bid phase. They're involved in that, and they have accountability during the operational term, which is not true for alliance projects. They have no skin in the game for the operational phase, but they are absolutely involved in P3 phase. As for the owners, your model absolutely depends on the owners being engaged and participating throughout the life of the project. So I think it's unfair to say that the owners are participating in one model and not participating in the other. If we're going to compare the two, we would have to assume that we have the same engagement for both models because the owners are supposed to be the same for both models. If we don't have engaged participating owners, both models will fail. But the engagement required on a P3 model is more limited to the upfront stage of that model through the procurement and the bid phase of that. They are supposed to be engaged through the design and construction phase as well, but the level of engagement that is needed isn't the same as it's needed on the alliance side. The alliance side definitely requires a lot more engagement, a lot more of a sophisticated owner, and we don't see these resources available in Canada. To that point, there are no completed publicly procured alliance projects in the Canadian market. So demonstrating success on that is pure theory, no matter which report says that they are going to work out.
Well, I would counter and say valid points. However, I would say that what's happening is we're finding actually that the owners are engaged and wanting to be, because of these assets are becoming such that they're not looking at them as static assets that are going to go for 20 years. They're looking for a value add in what they can do. Right now, one of the constant refrains we hear from all three levels of government is that they're getting 1960s technology replacing 1960s technology. Where's the innovation? And the innovation with the P3 model is very stagnant because it just it incentivizes to go down to the lowest cost. Whereas in an alliance model, there's more of a discussion in those areas. That's what we found. So I think that what's happening is we see that I think the owners need to become more engaged, and that was my last point, and we're seeing that. They're involved in all those areas and looking at criticality. One of the biggest things, and I think we all agree, is that a project when you develop it in 2010 isn't the same when it's in 2015. And the fact of the matter is that that's the mindset. Sometimes they think, well, that's fine, and we do a great job on maintenance, and we're not replacing our parts, and everything's great. But the fact of the matter is those infrastructures aren't designed to be the same as in 20 years. So we need to have that engagement with that, and that's what the alliance model does. It encourages that engagement and continued engagement.
So I would say you make all great points. I hate to say it, but what happens, how do you do your capital budgeting when you're always looking for new technology? What happens when the next Carillion happens and leaves 10 or so fixed price FM contracts and leaves Joey and I stranded? The government simply has to go reprocure it. They're going to get more expensive technology. It's going to disrupt all their budgets, and it's ultimately going to go back on tons of the taxpayer. How do you stop something like that from happening?
One of the things is we do it right now for many of our projects, we have a kind of criticality assessments of what's going on. And so we can assess some of those areas and where the things are going to come up, and they can plan for those capital projects. You're not a good operator if all of a sudden in year 15 you suddenly go, oh, guess what? We have to replace all the centrifuges. You know, that's just not going to happen. So there are built-in mechanisms to look at those assets and see how they're progressing and what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done.
Also, I'd counteract that. I think a fixed price contract 4 years before a thing goes into operation for 30 years, I mean, that's a challenge. We've seen it in the P3 in those operational terms, like fixing that price. We talk a lot about the construction phase, but the operational phase as well. There's some heavy risks in there, and they're being fixed price at a very early stage in procurement.
What happens when Wesley doesn't want to perform his obligation anymore? And he's just good, and he wants to go home.
In terms of like,
he's just I don't want to be at this plant anymore.
There's operators. There's a whole market of operators out there.
Right.
So you can re-procure.
Right. Well, exactly. That's my point.
All right, come to a standstill on this. Everything that you hear should be, food for thought. And if you're sitting with your app, feel free to change your vote as you go along. We see that things are going up and down a little bit as we talk, which is exactly indicating that people are listening and being influenced. So let's go to our next question. Question 2 is about risk allocation. Which model is better? And we're going to start with the Alliance team on this one. Josh?
Yep.
Okay.
So, let's get one thing straight. We're not comparing apples with apples here. We may as well be debating which is best, cheeseburgers or pizza. But factually, we acknowledge that there has been over 300 P3s delivered in Canada over the past 3 decades, whereas there are only a handful of alliances which are just being developed and are yet to be tested. So we can't make a direct project success comparison in the true sense. I believe the opportunity we have is to build a made-in-Canada alliance model to follow the success of the made-in-Canada P3 model, which is respected globally. I think it was mentioned earlier that that there's no depth in the market. Well, in the late 90s, there wasn't any depth in the market for the P3s. We need to invest. 2 of the fundamental P3 differentiators my opposition have are the involvement of private finance and typically, but not always, a long-term performance-based maintenance period. I argue that there is a lack of consensus in the P3 organization of what project success is to each team member and the client. Project co, lenders, builders, FM providers, the owners, the procurement agency, the ministries, and not forgetting the designers, of course, each have their own contractual agreements between them. It's a series of transactions to transfer risk and protect one's interests. We love the phrase, risks borne by the party best able to manage them, and you'll hear my opposition likely use that, but it's my observation that this is challenging at the best of times, and we're not actually that good at getting this right or pricing it effectively. The arbitrary topic of risk transfer is at the heart of the project success, but ultimately the taxpayer, i.e. you and me, pays the bill and bears the pain when things get really bad. For large and complex projects with great uncertainty, we need to transition from the theory of abstract risk transfer to risk optimization, and an alliance creates the vehicle to do this. But it's not easy. Implementation of transparency through open book structure, including greater pricing transparency and accuracy for the owner and contractor, requires a fundamental shift mindset and organizational culture. This is the challenge to unlock project success. I want to share with you an example of a project I think you would have benefited from Alliance type model, which is very personal to me as a resident of North Vancouver. A design-build finance P3 was awarded for a major North Vancouver wastewater treatment plant project in 2017. The contract was eventually terminated in 2021, and costs have spiraled to a number way beyond the original fixed-price contract. There was a value-for-money exercise undertaken. There was due diligence done by lenders, and there was an independent certifier in place, so all the checks and balances and safety nets were there, like any other P3. A contractor and delivery model has been replaced, and guess what? It's not a P3 procurement. Acknowledging that the project has had significant challenges, not related to the procurement model itself, such as addition of major scope elements and something you may remember called COVID, impacting delays and inflation like any other project. However, I believe that an alternative procurement model may have helped the project's success by working collaboratively versus dealing with a confrontational transaction which each party had a different view of what success and risk transfer meant to them. I argue that project success is about finding the best possible outcome for the project. When it's a tricky, challenging project, then the transaction of risk transfer and the heavy hammer of private finance is not a slam dunk route to project success, as some may have you think.
Right on time. So I think you kind of straddled the risk transfer and success questions, yeah?
Yep, they're linked.
Okay, fair enough. Over to, well, let's do the risk allocation part. That's the order I've got. But you can straddle as well if you wish.
Yeah, I'm going to take this one on. Risk allocation is something I love talking about and been talking about for the last couple of years. And that's partially the reason why we're here, is that in the last couple of years, say for example, last 5 or 6 years, there has been a misallocation of the risks on DBFMs. Obviously, it's depending on the asset class, it's depending on this, depending on that, but there has been flaws. The one thing we've got to keep saying over and over again is there's 200 examples on our side, there's 0 examples on that side. There's guaranteed to be issues that are going to come up. But when we actually talk about risk allocation, this isn't comparing apples for apples. It's actually not doing anything similar at all. One model is the risk transfer. You are transferring risk in some way or form, and that risk is being borne by the private sector in such a way that then it is then supported by letters of credit, performance bonds, PCGs, limits of liabilities. When examples are used about how bad DBFM projects get, what I think everyone outside of this room really fails to understand is that before it hits the public sector, we on the private side are taking huge losses. Just anyone who's been involved in any one of the LRTs, if you're sitting at the table, just give a nod to someone around the room and just be like, when we talk about the annoyance of what's happening with Eglinton or Ottawa or Edmonton or all these kind of issues, like I could talk about it from our perspective. I'd love to, because there was risk that was transferred, and we absorbed that risk in trying to deliver a successful outcome for the project. So what we've been asking for on the DBFM side isn't the alliance model, isn't about the owner taking back all this risk themselves and then seeing what will happen. It's really about, we were looking for minor drafting changes. So when we talk about collaboration, and there is issues such as, why authorities having jurisdiction, on a public infrastructure job, why does that wholly have to be a private sector risk when it's so better managed by a public official calling another public official and saying, you do realize they're not building a condo, they're building a hospital, they're building a detention center. Those risks never should have been transferred to us in the way that they were. That's what we were complaining about. We weren't complaining about the failure of the model as a whole. It has successfully delivered upon what it said it was going to do on a fixed time, fixed budget. I'm not saying that they all have gone right. There's 200 examples now, and we did have a pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, I'm quite sure it was something similar to 95% or greater on time, on budget. So when we look at that, the risk transfer in this side needs to be there, and what needs to not be forgotten is the fact that all we're comparing to on the other side, the risk transfer, the risk allocation is if a project blows up, or if it goes so badly, or if it goes beyond the limit of the private sector loss, profit, contingency, maybe overheads, not going to be the billions of dollars that has been lost in the transfer of DBFMs, which I hate saying is to the benefit of the taxpayer under that model. That wasn't absorbed by the taxpayers. That was absorbed by the shareholders. So I actually don't even believe that this is the debate at all, especially not in risk allocation, when you have it and when you don't.
All right. Risk happens, and sometimes it hurts, yeah? Okay, good empirical examples. Over to you. What do you say?
I guess I'm trying to get my thoughts around, Joey. Are you implying that DBFMs as they are still have a role, or there's a new world of DBFMs that are coming, like in terms of the need to adopt some of the alliance approach?
Absolutely. I mean, let's talk about some of the positive changes that are happening in DBFMs. I'm going to didn't initially love it, and I think last year I might have been up here shitting on it, but progressives. Okay, a progressive, when we talk about collaboration, it's a progressive DBF or a progressive DBFM. That's collaboration. There's significant amount of collaboration that are happening on the jobs right now that are addressing the exact issue that we've talked about. So there's absolutely a new generation. It's not going to be applicable for every single project. It's going to be only applicable for the large, very complicated jobs, or if you only have a sole proponent kind of environment. That needs to be there, but the solution to that is collaboration in a progressive model, not moving over to an alliance model and having a kumbaya session and thinking everything's going to turn out all right. It just, for me, that's the failure in the model. So I think absolutely a new generation is coming, but it's going to be in progressives, not in alliance.
So I go back to my original, I think alliances are new, and we've got a huge opportunity to create a made in Canada alliance as, to imitate the success of the P3s. So I think it's less around trying to transition the P3s or the DBFMs into like, how can we get like better risk understanding? It's like, how can we actually go back to the root cause of the problems and start thinking about how does the actual organization cooperate together, not just like playing a little bit of lip service to it to understand a bit more of the risk. Come back and like actually agree how we're actually going to objectively work together to resolve those risks. And some of those risks are so big, can they be transferred?
Yeah, but I agree with both sides. So if we look
You're
at
allowed to do that, by the way.
Sorry, just Joey. Just Joey, what Joey's saying.
Particularly Joey.
But if you look at, you didn't want to say the word, but Eglinton, okay? So Eglinton, first of all, the delta between the two bids was about $1 billion in 2016, okay? That's value for money right there, okay? I'm not saying that's the final contract value, but if we were to procure Eglinton again today, it would not be the same contract. I think we're all going to be in agreement for that, or nobody would bid it. We've made a lot of great strides in the DBF-OM model in transit, and we need to continue to build on it. Look at Ontario Line. It was great how they structured that. In the States, we've come a long way from Purple Line. West Santa Ana was supposed to be a P3. They did a great thing by putting all of the unknowns, all the rights of way, utilities, all the stuff that we have issues pricing, they were putting it in early works packages. We have come a long way, and these mega transit projects will not be the same sort of failures going forward because of it.
Agrees. I think it's not one size fits all. There's a bigger toolbox of procurement options that can be used.
Right.
Use the right one for the right project.
I believe that you could use the DBFOM model is a one-size-fit-all if you have the appropriate risk allocation within that model. We're not up here defending an inappropriate transfer of risk that has happened on those projects. I think that we could retender the Eglinton project and have it at DBFOM if we transferred some of those risks across to the public sector that shouldn't have been sitting in the private sector in the first place. I know there's been a ton of criticism on that particular project, but when we've been drilling into the active alliance projects, one thing that keeps coming up is that there is no DB, you're all on one team, it's going to cost what it costs, it'll be finished when it's finished, there's no budget at the outset, there's no schedule at the outset, and there's a significant amount of scope creep, and we're not really sure, let's say in the situation of a social infrastructure project, how you'd even have an alliance project when at the offset, you've got to be accountable to the taxpayers, say how much this project is going to cost and when this project is going to be finished, if that's kind of a fluid as you're developing through the project phase. And if we're talking about risk allocation and we're talking about like designers and consultants that are involved in the Alliance project, what's the incentive to get through that development phase, that pre-construction phase, and sign a contract to move forward into the construction if you're going to be paid on a time and material basis? That's attractive for designers and consultants. It's absolutely not attractive for design builders. Construction contractors, they're in the business of building things. They're in the business of just getting that done. They want to take the risk. They want that within their own control. They're not into this communist environment, let's say.
Oh, the C word.
Ooh. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the next topic, but I'll give you a chance to respond to it in the next topic.
I just have one question.
No.
Where are you getting your information from? Because it's not like that. We've heard about kumbaya moments and communism. Yes, I'm a communist. Exactly.
Communist.
Now, I'd just like to break some of this down a bit because I feel my learned friends over here should really be on my team when they talk about bankrupt constructors, P3s, claims and litigation, P3s, user pays, P3s, owner has no control over public assets, P3s, no bidders, P3s.
Erroneous.
All right, I'm going to move us to the next topic, but I'm glad to see a little bit of skirmish. It's good. Question 3, project success. Which is better? And that gives you the opportunity to actually define success as well as argue what's better. We're going to start with the P3 team.
Okay. Let's talk about project success. There is some really key criteria for project success. The first one is the project level success. You know, did the client get the outcome of what they were looking for? Was it on time? Was it on budget? From a project perspective, that defines success from that level. Then there's the success of whether or not the partnership. Were you able to get through the process of construction or procurement to construction into operations, and is there a strong partnership? That's another thing we're going to talk about. And then finally, and it's always embarrassing to talk about this, but is there profit? And what I mean by that is that these public infrastructures getting delivered by private companies. And if anyone has been on a project where you're in the black versus in the red, I can tell you right now that the other success factors change radically in terms of the partnership approach, in terms of, you know, even, God forbid, you know, sometimes quality will come into impact when people are pressed on those kind of items. So what makes P3s particularly applicable here is the fact that when you put it all together, all the different components of a P3, there's accountability towards that project success. People are in the right roles. One of the most frustrating things to be in a project is where we believe that everyone needs to sit at the exact same table. Because not everyone should be at that table. Some people's risks, some things that people are directly dealing with are night and day different than what the others have to deal with. I'll give you a prime example. It was thrown in our face about bankruptcies. Well, you know, I actually know a lot more examples under the IPD model, which, by the way, is Alliance/IPD. It's really pretty much the same. There's a lot of examples of how when they talk about project success, they drag everyone into a room. 90% of the time, you're talking about a risk that you're not directly responsible for. You have nothing to add. And if you don't have the right person at that table defining that success from your organization's perspective, you're not going to be able to get there. So when we talk about success on the overall, we also need to talk about the wide application of this model. This model can't be widely applied. The Alliance model, because it requires such senior level resources to be sitting around a table. At DBFM, we could have a project team go off there and you can go off and debate. You could go and report into your executives. But the way this fluid Alliance model works is you need to be spending your time and energy right there. I mean, when I look at our own organization and we have an area manager who's managing 50, 60 jobs, and I ask them, what are you spending all your time on? Oh, this Alliance contract right here. I've spent the last 6 months because I'm the only person that has the ability to speak on every single thing. That's not success for us. Like, that is, when we look at it in the grand scheme of things, it will work towards a project and all the rest of it, but you can only do 1 or 2 of those. Eventually, when you talk about market constraints, on our side, we're going to start to push back. We could only do so many. And then, God forbid, look over on the public sector side. When we look at resource constraints, like there's already a problem in the market in making sure that you have the right counterparts sitting across the table. When you have this type of a process where you're openly, you know, having to sit there for 6, 9 months, and I mean all the way through construction, you know, on a project level team, it doesn't make sense. It's not sustainable. It's not the way that we're going to deliver on our infrastructure commitments. So, you know, I know I'm not supposed to take a middle of the road, and I'm not really going to say. I'm kind of more like 95% of the jobs should be following in this sector. If you want to move over on the Alliance model, I mean, let's really, like, how is it any different from a CMAR, construction management at risk? It's pretty much the same thing. So I don't think when we talk about project success, this makes any sense at all. And I'm a little afraid that in the course of our conversation, by even putting us up here as a debate, we're actually giving validity to a model that really should only apply to 1 or 2 projects.
All right. So I don't know, there's a few things to respond to. I just have a sense that you're going to come at them.
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Joey doesn't want any of you at his table. He wants to direct the traffic himself. And it's fluid because, of course, the only argument we've heard from this side is that I'm not accountable when I'm on an alliance. Boring. Everybody uses that argument. And you know why they say we're not accountable? Because we don't end up in court. We don't end up with claims and litigation.
You haven't finished any projects. There's still time.
That's not true. Maybe in Canada.
You're not at risk for anything.
Certainly around the globe,
right.
it's been done many times before. Apparently, it's not competitive. There's lots of competitive alliancing frameworks. You're right, Jensen. I am going to bring up the pain share, gain share model.
Yeah, do it.
Because that is what makes me accountable, of course. And you know why? Because I have skin in the game. Everyone has skin in the game on an alliance. I want to go back to not being at the table. I'm the designer. On a P3, I'm not at the table, but everyone's interested in what I'm doing. I have no relationship with the operator. I have no relationship with the owner. I only have a relationship with the contractor. And guess who gives me all the risk? The contractor.
Okay, I'm a little bit confused. What do you mean no relationship with the owner, no relationship with the operator? If you have ever bid a P3, what will happen is the designer, you're working through design processes with the owner right there, getting direct feedback. So yes, can we make the DBFM process a little bit more collaborative? Can we get the fairness advisor to sometimes pull back a little bit more and to be able to allow proper conversations to happen? Absolutely, that can happen. But don't sit there and say as though you don't have a seat at the table, you don't have a relationship. You actually have an entire process that's there. The key difference is about where those risks are allocated. They shouldn't be allocated in an entity that has no right to be there. They shouldn't be privy to a conversation. Just say, for example, an engineer over here shouldn't be privy to an operating discussion over there and having to sit into a 1-hour discussion on how that's going to be shared. So this isn't about control. It's about standing up for the risks that you're willing to take and managing them and having accountability for those risks. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But there's accountability. And when you point to a no-claim environment, a no-claim environment is also times when you're looking at, say, for example, a P3, and you look at no-claim, it doesn't make sense. So I did just realize, as I'm talking, I took up Marie's time.
That's okay.
So my apologies.
Okay. We're a team over here. That's something that I know you guys preach a lot about, but I'm not sure you fully understand what it is. On the Alliance side, we've heard this, that you've got skin in the game, but absolutely, there's no incentive to come up with a reasonable target price. You have to have an overinflated target price, because then it's easy to achieve that and share the benefits of it. I don't think that we've been talking enough about pricing, right? Because we're talking about publicly funded assets. We're not talking about private ones. So we want to know, that we are getting some value for that money. We are getting the best price. And I think that going with a beauty contest to engage a design build partner, or whatever you call them when you have them, doesn't necessarily result in that, because not all of the design builders have the same supply chain benefits. So you can argue about that little bit of profit and contingency, and you can set that in stone, but you're absolutely not going to get all those supply chain and trade benefits. And you're not going to understand that in this market, there's a lot that the likes of Joey's construction company do to cash flow those trades, and they're essential on both sides of the model. Every model in Canada needs those trades. So I don't think that it's really fair to say that this isn't about price, that it is what it is, and it's going to be finished when it's finished, because most of the projects that we deal with, everybody wants to know when it's going to happen and how much it's going to cost. And that's needed before we can even begin. So it's probably perfect for a very complicated private sector project. I don't believe that it's going to be perfect for, let's say, a hospital in Ontario that's been tried and tested on the DBFM model and had no real challenges.
Don't think anybody said that we weren't cost controlled. I never said that. That's come from you, because you're ill informed. One thing I will make clear, though, that when a P3 does go bad, because let's face it, most of them have, particularly today, who pays for that? User, you guys, we do. We pay when it goes wrong.
Joey and I pay.
How?
That's how it works.
User pays when it, because the cost has to be recouped.
DBFM model, okay? Let's talk about compensation, skin in the game, okay? You got your three parties, your designer, so you're getting paid by the hour, or how long this drags out, how big the project gets, probably. You have a builder who's trying to build as much as they can and limiting their risk. And you've got a government that's trying to just keep it all on the rails. Okay, that's the dynamic in the alliance model. And P3, especially on the equity side, we don't get paid unless we win. We don't get our money back until year maybe 12, to ensure the project is a success. And our largest equity distribution comes at year 29 and a half after the debt leaves.
So that's a good deal for you, is it?
That's ensuring the project actually works.
Yeah.
That's what it's doing.
I highly doubt that. In every P3 that I've been on, that's not assuring anything. As the designer, it's just ensuring that the contractor's going to chase my PI. That's what that's assuring.
Okay. One thing I really want to point out, and you said something that was wrong, that P3s have not been successful. That's not right. We have had a challenge in the last couple of years, specifically on civil or transit-related P3s. I don't deny that. But that represents a very small segment of the overall P3s that have been delivered in Canada for the last 20, 25 years.
315.
So I'll give you an example. EllisDon's first 38 P3s, every single one of them was on time, on budget. Because at that time, the P3 environment did have better collaboration, had better partnership. It wasn't into that environment. But then, you know what happened? We hit the pandemic. And right around when we hit the pandemic, and we had the bad mistake of winning, I think it was 11 P3s, literally the year before the pandemic hit. And yeah, every single one of those has been challenged. And when you talk about who's ultimately paying, I got to tell you, the first entity that's paying, it's us. We're paying. Now, when it does fall on the public sector and the rest of it, P3s aren't about 100% risk transfer. It's risk allocation. So when we talk about a claim environment, or when we talk about, the public sector having to absorb some additional costs on a P3, well, those are the exact same costs that absolutely would be absorbed under an alliance model. And in this model, what's happened is that a big portion of them got absorbed by us first. And then there's some elements there that, yes, there are some elements where they retain risk. And those elements fall back on the public sector side. That doesn't make the model flawed. It means that there was something inherently wrong with the project, where it was a geotechnical issue or something happened on the project that had to be accounted for. It had to fall somewhere. That's how it plays out. So where I'm really being challenged right here is that I feel as though I have a practical debate over on this side about real life examples and the rest of it. And it's extremely difficult for us to argue against the theoretical notion of if we all just got in a room and sat around a table, we could figure this out. I didn't think that that's what we were ultimately trying to do here. I thought we were trying to deliver as much infrastructure as we can for the best outcome for the taxpayers. And that, time and time again, has been demonstrated through the P3 model.
You gonna let him have
On to
last
you?
word?
I agree with that, but I think one of the things that I see in this debate is that we take these models and apply them to all projects. And that's the problem. And I can only speak from my specific expertise or background is in environmental infrastructure, water, wastewater, waste, and energy projects, where we have the O&M capability. And we've seen time and time again, the projects just don't get off the starting point in a P3 model. And in the Greater Toronto area, there were two projects, which are going named, that literally fell on their own sword because the P3 model was just, the risk was just kept building up. The partners just added more contingency fees to the project that ended up being double the cost. And if they'd used an alliance model and were used some kind of a progressive where we're working together, we could have actually brought that cost down, but they weren't interested in listening to that. Their procurement departments were, this is the model we use. And as a result, what happened was two very important pieces of infrastructure are now gone. Now it's great, they're going to probably turn into a merchant opportunity, but right now, those regional governments can't build those projects because right now it's in the taste of the mouth of the councillors, it was double the cost under the P3 model. So I think what I'm trying to say, it's not one or the other. It's just saying, you have to look at these projects, especially where there's an O&M, and look at these things. I mean, we just don't bid on contracts that are based on 30% indicative design. It just doesn't work. We've just seen too many times where those projects end up in the operations, everything. It's just, we're going to assume that cost. We're not going to do that. And we've walked away from those projects. So it's got to be the alliance model. One of the things I see is that you need to have this collaborative consultative model actually takes that beyond a 30% indicative design. Otherwise, you end up with those two projects I mentioned. And people just say, I don't know enough, so I'm going to build in my contingencies. I'm going to build in my, build in the extra costs. And by the time it gets down to us as the O&M, it's way over budget.
So
I'm going to just stop you there, Jensen, because we need to get on to our last topic. But
we're just getting into the good stuff here, Mark.
all right, go.
No, I was just going to say, look, I understand Veolia's position. I've been fortunate enough to work with Veolia over the years, and your corporate risk transfer appetite has fallen off a cliff. You don't wrap your own kit on construction. You don't provide an O&M guarantee anymore. But I guess my question to you is, when I'm bidding on a water project, why are there 4 or 5 other water O&M companies that I can choose from? Like, are they simply missing the boat? Is it just corporate appetite? Like, why is there still a market for fixed price water O&M?
Well, I can't speak for the other companies.
Right.
And all I can do is I can speak for Veolia. And we've been a success about it. We've seen there's a lot of projects in the water sector specifically that we're just not willing to touch because of some of the unsubstantiated risks that are involved in those things. Now, if they want to go in, and Ontario is not a competitive market. And I won't get into that, but it is not a competitive market for that area. And other markets are such that we're just not prepared to take that risk.
Okay. We're going to come back to the main topic and the main question of the day. Reminder, the voting app is still open. The votes haven't moved for a little while, so some of you have swallowed your P3 app or whatever you've done, but to the extent that you have been influenced by what you're hearing, you're free to adjust your vote until the end of this, which is in about 8 minutes. Okay, returning to the overall debate proposition. Overall, P3s deliver better outcomes than alliances for major infrastructure projects. Agree or disagree? Alliance, you get to start. This is your chance to attack that topic, the big topic. And if there are grudges or unsettled issues,
Kate,
go ahead.
Oh, goodness me. Okay, so let's look at better outcomes for alliancing and how they can deliver major infrastructure projects. So when we look at Professor Bent Flyberg's book on the How Big Things Get Done from 2023, he said the delivery of big projects are worse than ever. His recommendation wasn't to make projects bigger, but to make projects smaller, more discrete, more modularised, and to be delivered as a single working organism where you can think slow but act fast. P3s are not necessarily designed with these recommendations in mind, as in order for them to be worthwhile, they have to be big so that they can provide the economic return on investment. And when it comes to public infrastructure, particularly brownfield, that's proven to be quite difficult. We need to be able to have long-term investment and you need to have the investment in the front end and front-end planning. There's not necessarily any benefit to modularising a P3 project because we want to get the project moving as soon as possible so that everyone can get paid. And we heard that here from the P3 side. The single working organism, what it does, and that's what Professor Bent was talking about in his book, was that you then can address the wants of each of the players right at the outset, rather than waiting for through each life cycle of phases. What alliancing will do is that it becomes adaptable and it's able to align with these objectives, and that includes even if the objectives change throughout that life cycle, and that's been known to happen so that we can focus on delivering better outcomes. So let's return to our hits again, remember our high impact truths, and connect these to the objectives. And we've talked about some of these already. So our one team, where the parties come together, you've heard the other side doesn't believe in that because they believe certain parties should be locked out of risk negotiations. But we want to make sure that we can foster and foster collaborative behaviours, so everybody should really be present. Under an alliance agreement, you have to exhibit those behaviours as the one team too. That single working organism has to work together, and they're contractually obligated to work together, and the behaviours are measured. One team isn't enough though, you definitely need the right people, and I think we've heard that and agree that on both sides of the fence here. And it's really that best for project ethos. So it's not just about the best for project for the delivery of the piece of infrastructure, but also making sure that the best people are on your project to deliver. That also will confirm and assure the single working organism and guarantee that front-end investment in the planning so that you get that assurance through the life cycle. We now need to upgrade our infrastructure more than ever and make use of the infrastructure that we already have. And we need to do that at the same time that we're probably providing a level of service. And that's the biggest sector where we're seeing that really is around transportation. We still need to operate our roads and rails while we're building new infrastructure. So that makes it really difficult for the owner and operator to then come in, take it apart and put it back together. We need that more successful driver for project delivery. On OnTrack Alliance, for example, one of the key performance indicators is that you have to demonstrate that you've delivered stakeholder outcomes at the same time as you're delivering the project. And we're measured on that. And there's an incentive for us to do that. Thus spending more time in the upfront planning, which I've already talked about, and including the key stakeholders. The next hit is really around creating the culture that people want to be part of. People are encouraged and have the right and responsibility to speak up and be part of a team under an alliance framework. Making friends and cultivating key relationships at the earliest stages of the projects is encouraged. It's too late when things go wrong to start to develop a culture of wanting a common goal. In the alliance, this has often been developed even before contractual award. Now, I know that Joey said to you that the designer has a relationship with the owner during the design period. They don't. I know. I'm the designer. I work at WSP. I'm always in the design team on P3s and the Alliance. The contractor is usually there jockeying for commercial position. I can't be innovative because it's about making money at that stage. You also heard they don't get paid until late, so they're in a hurry. Finally, I'd just like to say that the successful outcomes really shouldn't just be measured on what the output is. The successful outcomes are about how we got there just as much as the product that we delivered at the end.
Thank you. Responding.
Yeah, in closing, you guys jump in, obviously. There is definitely a place for alliance. Okay, if you can't figure out the right end date, if you have no idea how to forecast the cost of the project, the alliance model is for you. If I were to set off to build a brand new city in Saudi Arabia somewhere with Bechtel, the alliance model is great for that. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about largely ring-fenced infrastructure projects where you can figure out what the cost is, you can figure out the schedule. We have heard time and time again today that the alliance is more expensive. It is not really, we're not really set up in this country to pull it off properly from a procurement perspective, and there is no life cycle and maintenance accountability, which is scary. Is the DBFM model perfect? No, absolutely not. It has to be tweaked from where it is. We need a less price-driven environment. We need better technical DD at the beginning that we can rely on, but it is the right platform and the right starting point, not the alliance. You guys good with that?
Good with that?
That's good
All right.
for us, yeah.
All right.
That's it.